This is the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. What do you need to know if you're buying a home in Saskatchewan? Time flies when you're having fun, and it's time to recap Season 1 of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. I think we're at above 50 episodes now, so a perfect opportunity for us to look back at some of the best episodes if you're looking to invest or buy a property here in Saskatchewan. Before we get into our top 5 episodes, I would just like to quickly say, if you're enjoying this podcast so far, or if you've enjoyed past episodes, do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe button.
You're listening to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, where we chat with real estate experts from across the province to learn what's happening in the real estate market. Here's your host, Ron Quaroni.
All right, number 1, let's kick it off with Travis McConaughey in episode 17. Travis McConaughey is honestly one of the smartest people we interviewed on the podcast this year. He primarily invests in smaller centers in Saskatchewan, and his knowledge of those centers was incredible.
Yeah, I love secondary markets. You had asked the question, about investing in secondary markets. So Saskatchewan, primarily agriculture. So whether you're in Milford or Rosetown, going southern Saskatchewan, lots of, stable communities down there. I like where you're getting a regional hub. So driving across the prairies, I look up. And if you go to Tisdale, there's a whole number of concrete elevators there. And the concrete elevators are there for the long term. Huge grain producing area, huge stability. If you go to, say, Swift Current of the world, same thing. You've got, a regional hub for agriculture. Do I like Swift Current? Absolutely. But these towns aren't necessarily oil driven as Estevan is. Yorkton, that's another great place to invest. Yorkton, I would like because it has lots of manufacturing, it has lots of processing, and it has agriculture, and it's a regional hub. The challenge, though, when you enter any market is you got to look beyond, maybe the people and maybe the cheap deals, because there might be a reason the deals are cheap. The major difference in some of these secondary markets is property taxes. And that is the absolute reason to not invest in Yorkton and to not invest in Swift Current. Although the towns are great and the people are great and the ability to rent might be great, the taxes are in that class of asset are actually horrible. So you could pay double the property tax in Swift Current or Yorkton than you do in a city like Maidstone or North Battleford or Milford. So it makes a massive difference. The other interesting thing, if you're driving around Saskatchewan, back in the day, there was a number of builders, and the builders, picked a model of a building to build. So say they're building an 8-plex, it would have 4 units up and 4 units down, maybe 2 bedrooms up and 1's down. And that same building I have in Nipawin, in North Battleford, in Maidstone, and there's the same building in Milford. So the same assets actually exist in the same towns. So you can actually compare an apple to an apple. You can get the rents by, sourcing what the rents are in those markets. So you actually know the building, you know what it should be worth, and you know what the rents are. What you need to find out before getting too aggressive in the market is what are the taxes. Ramey is another major builder back in the day, and they continue to build through Tamarack Ventures in the Northeast. So if you're looking at Ramey assets, built in the 1970s, a lot of flat roof buildings, 12-unit apartment buildings with brick fronts. And that same building can be found in, say, in Leader, in Tisdale, in Milford, in North Battleford, in PA. They built the same box in every town. So you become the expert in secondary markets, but you become the expert in, building A, building B, building C, because building A is the same in all these towns. Building B is the same, building C. So it becomes quite interesting becoming the expert in, Saskatchewan markets.
When investing in a community, there is one thing that trumps everything else, and that is jobs and employment. In episode 38, Humboldt realtor Dan Torwalt and I talked about the massive investment that BHP is making into their potash mine at Jansen and Leroy. So it's a huge project, and Dan, growing up in the area, has a great knowledge base of kind of what's happening there. And it was great to sit down with him and break down how positively this is going to affect Humboldt and area's economy. So going back to that time where they first announced that, can you take us through what the experience was of this huge influx of workers and the initial work there? If we were to kind of draw parallels, Dan, what was it like then and what are we expecting it to be like now?
Yeah, like in 9, 10, 11, right up until they sort of slowed down a bit there. It was like probably at least once, twice a week, and this is just our office and ourselves. Someone was calling the office, someone was coming here because they had a job at BHP or they were going to apply for a job at BHP. That's in the residential end. We had a lot of investors in the area buying properties up because they were renting to the workers because there wasn't enough housing, so they had to stay somewhere, right? They could stay there was a camp in Lanigan, I think, for 500 people. And I see the same thing happening here. A lot of the people, they come out into the camp and then they don't like the camp living or they want to move their family here. So we get those type of calls. I've been at the camp for 3-4 months. I like the area. I'm going to be secure in my job. I want to come here and buy a house and move my family here. So I see that same thing happening again. Like that camp of 36, that camp can hold 3,500 people. But that, and that's what the people in this area have to realize. They don't have to live at the camp. It's not like they're forced. That camp is there in case there's no housing, right? And you have to have housing. But a lot of those people aren't going to want to live on the camp. Like this isn't a camp that you're going way up Uranium City where there's nothing around, right? Like, we're in the middle of the province, Saskatoon, 2 hours away or an hour and a half away, Regina, an hour and a half. People are going to want to come here. They're coming here and they're going to want to live around the areas and go and work at the mine, not like live in the camp and take back to wherever they're coming from, Ontario, BC. So that's the thing to get around in people's heads. That's what we see happening. And the commercial end was the same way. We would get phone calls once a week on big corporate company guys because BHP is such a safety-oriented place. You can't go on site and service equipment. If something breaks down, you got to take it off. You have to store stuff off-site, right? So we had a lot of companies that were going to get these big contracts. They were looking for commercial land, commercial buildings, fencing, compound, some acres that they could buy so that they could put their crew or their company in there. And when 2012, we used to get phone calls once a week. When this mine gets going another year or two, I want to set up, what do you got for commercial property? Hey, it's going now. So that's going to happen too. We're going to get people coming in looking for commercial properties, land. It's just a snowball thing. It's just going to, I see it just taking off. We had a pause for 8 years, 9 years, which seems like it took forever, but it just seems like yesterday, right? Yeah.
A lot of this just screams opportunity, doesn't it, Dan? When you have this much money, this many people coming into an area that is also open to industry and development, it's just a perfect combination of things that are happening. The home buying process can be very complicated and hard to understand, but one thing that a home buyer needs to know as they're buying that first home is prepayment penalties and how they work. In episode 13, Ellen Roseman, business journalist, joined us on the show to talk about prepayment penalties and how they could negatively affect you.
When you get a mortgage, you have a choice of going with a variable rate, which means that your rate can go up and down on a regular basis, and you have no control over that. It's really the bond market, which affects the long-term rates on mortgages, and the Bank of Canada rate, which affects the short-term rate on mortgages. A lot of people, especially if they're first-timers, see this as difficult and frightening. They want to be in control of the rate. So they go for a fixed term rate, which is usually 5 years. So once you get that mortgage, you know for the next 5 years exactly what your payments are going to be, and they're not going to change. The problem is that these fixed term rates might end up being much too high if the Bank of Canada rate goes down or if the bond market rate goes down as well. So you're stuck paying a much higher rate than you want. What do? You go back to your mortgage lender. If you're in year 1 or 2, they'll say, well, no matter, if you haven't got to the end of your 5-year rate, they'll say there is a penalty you have to pay to get out of this mortgage. And then you ask them what it is. And if you are earlier on in the mortgage, if you're in year 1 or 2, it can be very large, 5 figures, 10,000, even 20,000, 25,000, depending on the size of your mortgage and how much time you have elapsed. As you get on later, it's not quite as bad. But there always is a penalty, and it's not clear what it is. A lot of people think it is a 3-month interest penalty. 3 months of interest doesn't sound so bad, but that is only the penalty on a variable rate mortgage. So with a variable rate, it's easy to get out. With a 5-year fixed term rate, it can be really expensive because the big banks, which control a lot of the mortgage market, have a way of calculating those penalties that favor them over you. For example, the biggest thing that people get upset about is when you're getting that 5-year mortgage, the posted rate, which is the rate when you walk in, you might see it on the screen, or you might say, what's the rate? They'll tell you. Rarely is that the rate you'll pay. You have a little bit of wiggle room, so you can negotiate with the bank, and they will give you a discounted rate. So you're paying this discounted rate for 5 years, but when it comes time to calculate the penalty, they will charge you the posted rate, even though you're not paying the posted rate. And here's the problem. The penalty compensates the bank for what they would lose if you got out of the mortgage early, because they're, instead of saying 4.79%, which you might have been paying 5 years ago, now you might be going down to 2%. So they want the difference between those two, but they exaggerate it by the way they calculate these penalties. And people find it distressing and upsetting. They don't know about it. They're not really disclosed properly because nobody really knows how the banks calculate penalties. It's not standardized, and all the banks do their own way of doing it.
Another really important part of the home buying process is the down payment. That's why I also wanted to include a clip from my great interview with Scott Tremblay in episode 9. He's a mortgage broker in Saskatoon, and Scott did a really nice job, I think, of explaining down payments and mortgage default insurance fees. So, Scott, Ron Quaroni comes to you. I would like to get a mortgage. I only have 5% down. Yes. If you were explaining to me how that insurance premium worked, or exactly how much it would cost me, let's say I 5% down on a $400,000 house. What are you telling me about insurance premiums?
Yeah, so basically in that case, if you're buying a $400,000 house, 5% of that is $20,000. So the bank is going to be lending $380,000 on that mortgage. Now, because the bank is lending such a high portion of the total value of that home, they're at a fairly high risk, if you were to not make your mortgage payments and walk away from that home, of taking significant losses if they had to sell the home quickly, hire realtors. Maybe the home was damaged because someone's leaving, walking away from it. So the Canadian banking system requires anyone buying 5% down or 10% down to get CMHC insurance, and it gets added on to the mortgage as a one-time fee. That insurance is strictly to protect the bank. So if you were to walk away from the home, it's like your vehicle. If you damage your car, you hand the keys over to SGI or whoever your insurer is, and you say, here, it's your problem now, give me my check. That's exactly what the banks would do if they took losses on that home. So the home buyer pays that premium. It gets added on top of their mortgage. So they put 5% down. And in that case, CMHC would add a 4% one-time fee on top of your mortgage to start. It's a one-time fee. You pay it off over the life of your mortgage, but it allows you to get in for that lesser down payment. And then the bank has that added protection where if something were to go wrong, that they can get out of that mortgage. And so the benefits to the client, although they pay the fee, they're able to buy the home for 5% down, which normally the banks would never do.
Right. And that 4% gets added not to, in our case, the 400,000, but to the mortgaged amount, right? The 380,000. So it would be a 4% on 380. And then that's the chunk of money that you would now have to pay down over the term.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, from one broker to another, we're going to episode 41. My conversation with Peter Kinch, is Canadian real estate in a bubble? Now, this episode might have actually been disappointing to some of you because a lot of first-time homebuyers are waiting for real estate prices to come back down. According to Peter, that's likely not going to happen. Let's show you why.
There's no bubble that's going to burst any day soon. I'll tell you why. I think there's 3 factors that are going to play a major role in this moving forward. Number one, let's go back to that K-curve economy. Number one, the biggest thing is when, and hey, knock on wood, if we ever get past this 4th wave Delta variant and get back to a so-called normal, and the pandemic is something that we can look at the rearview mirror and behind us, what you're going to find is an unprecedented wave of spending in the economy. I mean, those companies that are on that bottom part of the cave are going to come up. The people who are on the top part of the cave, they're not going to come down. That's not going to adjust downward. Money's going to flood into the economy. People are going to fill restaurants. They're going to start spending like they never have before. And now that might not be prolonged, but in the short term, you're going to see a flood of capital back into the markets. Well, that's just going to support what's already there. The second thing I think that's underestimated that people are paying enough attention to is immigration. When the pandemic happened, Canada shut the border hard on immigration. But do you know there's upwards of 400,000 people who are approved for immigration into Canada? And it's going to be like opening the floodgates. When we finally do release those restrictions, you're going to have a wave of immigrants into Canada. Well, they need somewhere to live, right? So that's going to at least bolster or support current prices. And the third part that I think is less predictable, but equally important, is what I refer to as the bank of mom and dad. And Ron, I would say, and mark my words on this, I'm happy to go on record, we are on the cusp of the greatest transference of wealth in the history of our country, from the baby boomers to people in their 40s and 20s, and the trickle down of that. And what I mean by that is, if you look at anybody who's in that baby boomer age range, they're typically the people who have lived and owned their homes for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Well, quite frankly, they've been the greatest recipients of this latest boom in house prices. Totally. And most of them were sitting on free and clear properties.
There you have it, everyone. If you are looking to buy a home in Saskatchewan, there is so much information that the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast can offer you. Videos on different communities, real estate professionals, different mistakes that you should avoid, and of course, all this information coming from real estate experts who are familiar with the communities and the topics that they are discussing. If you enjoyed this video, please show your support by hitting the like and subscribe button. One quick special note, the podcast is going to return next February. We're going to take a 2-month hiatus here, but we already have dozens of guests lined up for next year to share their knowledge. So thanks so much to all the guests who made the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast a success this year, as well as everyone who's tuned in and taken in more information and become more of a real estate expert in Saskatchewan. So until 2022, I'm Ron Quaroni, your Saskatchewan mortgage professional.
This has been the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. If you like this episode, find more information and episodes on our Facebook and YouTube pages. If you'd like to be a guest or have a conversation you'd like to learn more about, let us know by messaging the show on Facebook. Thanks for listening.